Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's panel. Schulich Connects is technology impacting the outcome of our elections. It is a thrill to see you all here for our third virtual Schulich Connects. We are so glad you're taking the time to stay in touch with us this way. We're enjoying record attendance at our Schulich Connects and appreciate the opportunity to bring everybody together during this difficult time. I'm so glad we're keeping the conversation going on engineering and innovation. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that the University of Calgary is on the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta. The city of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. Before I introduce today's panel members, I'd like to make note of the fact that the panel members join us from across the University of Calgary, from the faculties of law, engineering, arts, and public policy. Bringing teams together from across disciplines in this way is an important focus at the University of Calgary and the Schulich School of Engineering. The University of Calgary just solidified its commitment to transdisciplinary post-secondary education and research through its new plan titled Unstoppable: Growth Through Focus. This is the plan to keep the momentum of the university's strategic plan eyes high going forward. The plan is focused on three priorities: transdisciplinary research, deeper community integration, and future-focused program delivery. In keeping with our commitment to program innovation, the Schulich School of Engineering is launching our newest engineering major in biomedical engineering. A new cohort will start next fall in this exciting program, gaining amazing training that cuts across engineering disciplines and biomedical topics. Closer to today's topic, we're delivering programming that is future-focused. New programs like our minor in digital engineering, masters in engineering and software engineering, and launching of our new digital makerspace Zeta, where students from across campus can develop their skills in virtual and augmented reality, IoT technologies that build society's interconnectedness, and more. Through these initiatives, we are working to be a strong contributor to the digital ecosystem, supporting learning, research, and the launch of new ideas and entrepreneurial successes. With the onset of COVID-19, we've seen digital technologies for work in home hit high levels of importance never experienced before. And that's why conversations like today's are so important. Together, we're leading discussions about where technology can take us and how it is being used to improve and impact our lives. Together, we can find solutions that counter important issues. It is now my pleasure to introduce our panel members today. Dr. Lisa Young is the Director of Graduate Programs at the School of Public Policy here at the University of Calgary. Dr. Young has held numerous leadership positions, including Dean of Graduate Studies. Her research focuses on Canadian politics, including women's involvement in politics, election finance, and political party organization. She is author of Feminists in Party Politics and co-author of Rebuilding Canadian Party Politics and Advocacy Groups. Dr. Young has kindly agreed to moderate our panel discussion today, as well as contribute her knowledge and expertise. Dr. Hadi Himata is an associate professor in our electrical and computer engineering department here at the Schulich School of Engineering. His main research interests are in augmented software engineering and trustworthy artificial intelligence. He has a strong focus on empirically investigating software engineering practices in large-scale systems. And joining us from the Faculty of Law is Dr. Emily Laidlaw, an associate professor. She is a member of the Institute for Security, Privacy, and Information Assurance and researches information and technology law, cybersecurity, human rights, online content regulation, and corporate responsibility. Dr. Layla is the author of Regulating Speech in Cyberspace, Gatekeepers, Human Rights, and Corporate Responsibility. Thank you all for agreeing to speak with us today and bring your expertise to this very important conversation. Lisa, over to you.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Bill. And I was just reflecting as we were getting started here today that Hattie and Emily and I have participated in a few panels for the University of Calgary on this topic or similar topics, but it's the first time that we've done it virtually. So it's sort of ironic that it took a pandemic to get us to occupy the digital space that we're talking about. Of course, this panel discussion is incredibly timely. Next week, there will be a very consequential election in the United States. Even if it weren't for the current COVID crisis, it would have been an election that someone from 20 years ago would not have recognized. So much of it is taking place on platforms like Facebook, Twitter, that hadn't been invented. The importance of social media and small screens is really unlike anything that I think I could have imagined if I was thinking about the 2020 election at the time of the millennium. So what we're going to do today is to tackle two elements of the role of technology in election campaigns and elections themselves. And we're going to start by talking about the act of voting itself and whether we should stick with paper or whether we should venture into some of the new possibilities that technology offers. And that includes voting machines, like the ones that are used in the United States, in most states, and also the question of internet voting. And Dean Rosehart and I have a long conversation going about whether if you can do your banking online, should you be able to vote online? So before we get into this question about voting, and sorry, I'll explain, and then the second part of our conversation will have to do with the impact of technology on the campaign itself, the role of AI, algorithms, and all of these other things. But before we launch into that, we want you to have a chance to participate. So we're going to put up a couple of polls for you to answer, and then we're going to put the polls up again after we've had a bit of a chat to see if anyone's changed their mind. So if Nicole could put up the polls, we've got two questions. The first is, should we here in Canada be able to vote electronically on voting machines? So that means you would walk into a polling station and instead of picking up a little pencil and marking your X, you would vote on a machine. And then the second question asks whether we should be able to vote online, just like we do our banking online. So we'll give you a couple of minutes to or a minute or so to answer that. Nicole, whenever you're ready to, you've seen that enough people have voted, then we will show the results and start our conversation. Okay, so we've got 76% in favor of being able to vote electronically on voting machines, and we've got 56% in favor of being able to vote online. So with that, I will ask that we take the poll results down, and I'm going to throw the question open to Hattie to talk a little bit about the technology of voting.
Hi, good morning. Yeah, I think purely from technology perspective, we are definitely there. The privacy and security of a network-based system is high enough that we do most of our daily works online now. As you said, banking online, we file our taxes online. There are even possibilities to do medical surgeries remotely. There are cases that you can do control the safety critical remote site fully online. So the security and privacy of some of these use cases, I would say, even more important than an election. Even with respect to voting, there are some countries that are doing the voting online. They're doing their either from the machines or fully online as well. So from technology perspective, again, I think there is no issue. Obviously, we need preparation, technical preparation, and also we need to prepare the public so that they can trust. But there is nothing that I would say it needs technological invention so that we can go there.
Okay, thanks so much for that, Hattie. So I've opted to take the other side of this debate and argue in favor of those little pencils that we use. And I will make a couple of arguments here. But first, I have to say, as a political scientist, that I take issue with Hattie's notion that there are things that it's possible that there's something more important than an election. But all joking aside, I think there are a couple of reasons why we need to be very cautious about moving into the space of voting either on machines or online. If we think back to the US election in 2020 and the voting machines in Florida, remember the weeks of agonizing and trying to audit the hanging chads. The machines are certainly not infallible, and it can introduce risk into the process of voting and potentially can risk error. We also know that there were efforts to hack voting machines in the United States in the 2016 election. They were mostly unsuccessful, but again, it raises all sorts of questions. And much as I'm willing to trust my bank to let me do my banking online, I'm not sure that I'm willing to trust the election authorities in Canada to run online voting. Why is that? Because they're not adequately resourced. Banks have the kinds of resources that they need to really manage privacy because they're doing this every day, because it's essential to their business. To ask election authorities that only run elections once every 4 years to be ready with that level of technological capacity, I think really is putting too much trust into an under-resourced public entity. So now I'm going to hand it over to Emily to give her view on all of this.
Thanks, Lisa. So it was interesting what you said about trust. So I'm going to park that for a second, because what went through my mind is I'm generally for the ability to use technology for voting, provided that you can authenticate who the voters are and that it's secure. And those are really the kind of two criteria I think about. And some of the reasons I think that it could be a good thing is that it might generally open access to voting to those that might have more difficulty voting in person. And this is also assuming that this wouldn't be the only way that you could vote. Like in my mind, you would still be able to vote in person if you wanted to, because if it went purely online or I mean, I guess you were talking about actually voting with electronic boxes as well, but I'm thinking more in terms of online voting. You do have to analyze kind of the digital access issues, that digital literacy issues, and some of the kind of the digital divide and inequalities in access. But you did mention something else, which was the idea of trust. And so when I think, yes, let's do this, as long as you can authenticate, as long as it's secure, that doesn't overcome the trust issue. And I think that, you know, a secure space kind of creates that environment of trust, but that issue of trust in technology goes beyond what you can do technically. And some of that might be the way that we structure this, whether there are third parties that really are trained and experts in this that can provide that sense of trust to the public. But as you say, maybe we're not entirely there. I vote for it. I think we should proceed with this, but there is a hump with trust.
Okay, well, thanks so much for that. So we're going to put the poll up again, and we're going to get you to vote again, because you can never vote too often, right? That's what political science brings to this, just to see if anyone's views have changed. So same questions, go again. While we're waiting, I'm just going to say that I think one of the reasons, aside from my principled objections to voting online, I'm deeply attached to that moment of walking into a high school gym and being there with other citizens. So that's my sentimental argument in favor.
You know what's funny is I was reading a federal, I was kind of flipping through this federal government report about online voting, and they were talking about that idea that you lose the experience of voting, and they, value that as kind of a key aspect of what we do when we go vote.
It's one of the very few things that we do together as citizens. Okay, so we've got our poll results up here. And while the majority of you would still move in the direction of electronic voting of some sort, it's gone down ever so slightly. We've got 71% in favor of voting on voting machines, which I think is down from 76%. And we're down to 52% for voting online. So while I did not sway the vote, I did move a couple of people. And I'm saying that because in the chat, Dean Rosehart is crowing that the majority are on his side. So the wonders of technology. We're going to move on now to some of the bigger questions about technology and elections. And of course, elections are in part about that moment when you go to vote, whether it's on your laptop or in a junior high gym. But the election is much bigger than that. It's the political conversation that takes place in the weeks, or in the American case, months in advance of election day. And so I want to start by asking Hattie to talk a little bit about the importance of these things that we keep hearing about, algorithms and artificial intelligence. What are those things, and how do they shape what we see during election campaigns? Hattie?
Okay. By the way, I would suggest we do this voting again in 10 years and see this 100% on my side. Okay. So for the impact of algorithms, I think we can look at this from two main perspectives. One is the algorithms that social media infrastructure providers such as Twitter or Facebook use to sort and rank the contents that they show us to decide what they want to promote for the users. And the other is the algorithm they may use to monitor and control user provided contents. Okay, I start from the first one. From the first perspective, part of the equation for that sorting and ranking is basically inherent in social media platforms. That is, when we use a Facebook platform, we already know that we are in a social bubble of our friends and their friends network, right? This is already biased, but we should know about this in the first place. We may forget that from time to time and think that this is the entire world, but it's nothing different than tuning into a TV channel, a news channel, let's say we tune to Fox News or CNN and think that is the entire world, right? Which is not. But there is also a component of this sorting algorithm that is unclear for the users. That's a black box. The social media companies can and indeed they do tweak their algorithms to rank the post and decide among all possibilities what should be shown, let's say, in the first page of your wall, of your account, so that they can get our attention. And attention is basically clicking on a post or watching a video. Now, this is, I would say, a little bit of a conflict of interest, because I would say since their goal is purely increasing our engagement, right? Whereas what we ideally want is a comprehensive, non-biased platform that give us all the news, from the world. But given that optimizing engagement may indirectly be biased towards some type of messages that a particular campaign is producing, so yes, I would say this algorithm can shape our view toward one side or the other, even if it is completely, honest and there is no misconduct there. And the second aspect is the second aspect of social media algorithms that may have huge impact, as I said, is how they monitor and control the potential harmful user-provided contents. This part is almost close to zero as far as I can tell now. There is so much possibilities that can be embedded as features in these platforms to give us a more trustworthy experience, which is unfortunately not there. For example, social media platforms can give us some confidence that a posted image is not altered, or an image or a video is not manipulated, or a posted statement is not contradictory with the source that it comes from if it is available on internet. Or even simple things such as tracing a post back to its source in the network. Where is it coming from? Which traces it took? Whether it's changed over this path. So I conclude that technology is available to control the side effect of the algorithms and AI, but they are not being fully leveraged. So they impact, yes. And are we doing all we can to use them in the best way? No.
Okay, thanks so much for that, Hattie. And as you were talking, I was thinking about an instance that I've been following quite closely. There are some researchers in the engineering school at New York University who've set up basically a share or crowdsourced research project where they're trying to get a sense of who's seeing what in terms of political ads on Facebook. And so they've created this open access resource where people can report what they're seeing on their Facebook feed. And Facebook is trying to shut them down because Facebook doesn't want people to be able to make sense of these questions of algorithms, right? So in a lot of these conversations, Facebook really does come off as the bad guys. So with that, I'm going to turn to Emily because her area of expertise is the regulation of social media platforms. So Emily, I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about whether governments should be more interventionist in regulating what these platforms do.
I think that is where the momentum is going, but we have to tread carefully because these companies kind of play this sort of interesting role. They're like these nodes or gatekeepers between all the different ways that we communicate online. And if we overregulate, then you end up entrenching these big players because they're the only ones that can comply with the regulatory environment. And so you never have the sort of like small companies that are, crafted and built in someone's basement or garage, suddenly unseating the big players. And so I would say we need to proceed as kind of like with a scalpel in the way that we kind of approach regulation here. But maybe I can set out just really briefly what sort of the basic environment is here. And I'm just going to talk about it generally and globally, but because there's some regional variations. But the big law that everyone keeps hearing about is Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act in the United States. And so a lot of these companies have grown in an environment where under that law, at least in the States, they're generally immune from liability. So they host this space, all these third parties communicate, but they're not liable for the content that's been created there. But of course, this sort of, in a way, cesspool has been created, and more recently, the virality of sort of misinformation has taken over these spaces. And so they have created their own community standards. They've essentially self-regulated this space. And in some ways, we rely on them to do that. If they're immune from the liability, and this is kind of really generalizing the law here. If they're generally immune from liability, then there's a risk of just it being that kind of old Wild West of content there. So they've created their own rules, but there are a lot of problems with this. They have essentially become the free speech police. They have set free speech policy globally. They also have tremendous power. And I think that the other thing is that we're all wondering what they are now. With this power, they've taken on all kinds of different roles. So they're no longer sort of this neutral third party that provides this nice little space that people comment and, about cat videos. They are spaces that they tweak with the algorithms that they create. They're designing our social spaces. They're making decisions about what content stays up and takes down. So if we think of, the recent controversy about, the takedown of the New York Post story about Hunter Biden. This is incredibly controversial because it's making decisions about the news that we see and I guess the reliability of that information. But maybe I'll leave it there and we can keep talking because what you do with this, it's a complicated problem, I'd say.
Probably the complicated problem of the 21st century. So I want to throw it back to Hattie, and I'm going to ask a really simple question, and that is, what technology or use of social media really worries you the most in the context of democracy and elections?
Sure, but before I answer that, just one thing that came up to my mind is we have to distinguish two things. One is what the algorithms and like AI and these technologies side effect is without we knowing it, and the other is what the CEOs and CTOs of these companies decide to put as policy, right? Some of the stuff that Emily mentioned is the internal policy of a company to decide what it should be there, what should be put down, right? It's the human part. So I didn't talk about those. So I only talk about the side effect of the algorithms. If Facebook or Twitter runs an algorithm that sorts the post and these posts are coming up, right? Is there any side effect on that, right? So these two are kind of, which would be, if there is a side effect that we cannot control, that would be bad because it's it's an agent, it's a black box agent doing some stuff that impacts our decision and we don't even know, we can't even control. But as far as it is about the human decisions, so that is outside of what I know, right? So, okay, so back to what you're saying in terms of the technology and what worries me about the technology, again, only purely from the technology perspective is if what worries me is a black box solution that there's no transparency, I don't know how it works and I have no control on it. And that is being used a lot by me and by people around me. So that would worry me, and which means that what I would like to have is it would be good to have some sort of regulations for these companies to tell us, for instance, where this piece of information is traced back to, right? As simple as this, okay? This is giving me more information about the post, so I can decide by myself, right, whether I want to trust this or not. It's technically possible. A lot of ideas people have thrown out, and these features can be easily added as on demand. You don't even need to put it for everybody. So it can be like a push button saying, okay, so this, give me more information about this, right? Well, how much you trust on this, and then explain why you think this is 90% trustworthy. And then I decide. So if it is completely black box, then that worries me.
Right. Okay, thank you very much for that. Emily, maybe I'll turn to you now and ask what worries you in this space.
I just want to respond to Hattie, if that's okay, and then say
you do that, yeah.
Because there's an interesting crossover with what we were talking about. One of the things I didn't kind of touch on was the sheer scale of content that we're dealing with here. And so in regulatory terms, we're in this really weird space of kind of techno-legal solutions where sometimes you have maybe human content moderators, often it's in combination with the use of AI to deal with kind of the millions of complaints and tracking some of the content to determine what needs to be taken down. But someone also needs to design it and design the meaning of, for example, hate speech. What is hate speech? I mean, that is incredibly difficult in every instance for a court to be able to assess. And yet we're trying to now design into the algorithms to deal with some incredibly, complicated questions of, for example, terrorist and violent extremist content, things like this. And so it's the dynamic between the two that, at least for me as a researcher, is quite interesting, because we can never get around the fact that we're dealing with scale here. So we can't say, well, every item needs to be assessed thoughtfully by people with the appropriate training, because it's just not realistic. So what do we do then with reality that we have? what keeps me up at night? I'm terrified of blunt regulatory responses. This seems to be the knee-jerk reaction. We are seeing a lot at United States with the recent executive orders from President Trump. We are seeing that out of Europe, where we see, the concern about terrorist and violent extremist content resulting in laws that require platforms to take down content within 24 hours or risk liability, or imposition of more active monitoring. This is, as I said, that balance between innovation and kind of the balance with human rights requires sometimes more thoughtful solutions. And it means people like me and Hattie need to be sitting down to say, how do we work that out? Because I think that the more nuanced regulatory responses inevitably have a technology component, and that is going to be the way through it. And I think the other concern I have, and I think Lisa, you have it as well, is what do we do about misinformation? And when we look at what happened with New York Biden, you have a traditional media article that was taken down because it was seen as unreliable information. In the past, this would normally have been dealt with by other journalists that would have questioned the reliability of the information, and itself would have become a news story. I'm concerned that Facebook and Twitter kind of usurp the role of traditional media, but the reality is the virality of information and the psychology of people and the way that it works is that the second that story was out there, whether it's from traditional media or someone who is writing in their basement a blog post at 2 a.m., it is entrenched, it's viral, and it is believed, and it changes minds in a way that cannot be undone. So what to do about that particular thing is, I think that we always look to the platforms and say, well, they just need to solve all of this, but don't solve it on your own. There needs to be laws. And I don't think any of that is providing us with the answers that we need.
Maybe I'll pick up there on this notion of once something is out there, it's believed, right? And there's lots of evidence about this from social science, from neuroscience. I'm wondering, either Emily or Hattie, do either of you want to jump in about the psychology of misinformation? How is it that we are so prone to believe this misinformation that pops up in these spaces?
I can't speak to the psychology, but I can speak to the communication sciences side of it, which is that, I don't know why people believe what they believe, but what I do know is that, and a lot of the media studies have shown that if you point out to people that it's incorrect, and we're saying that this is what Facebook should do, right? Flag that content might not be reliable. But what they have found is that the psychology of people is that it just further entrenches them in their belief. And so I think we should still, you should still flag that things are incorrect, but it's not actually going to solve the problem. But Lisa, maybe you can speak more on the psychology.
Way to take over as moderator there. Well, and I think, maybe I'll sort of transition here into talking a little bit about what keeps me up at night, because I think that we've got some phenomena here that are really reinforcing one another. So Hattie, early on in our conversation, mentioned the idea of bubbles, right? That social media lets us increasingly live in bubbles where we hear from people who have ideas or opinions that are the same as ours. And so one of the implications of that, definitely in the United States, but I think to a lesser degree in Canada as well, has been a polarization of opinion, right? That you surround yourself by people who have the same political views. That's, who pops up on your Twitter feed or in your Facebook feed. And you increasingly start to see a vision of the world where this seems real. And because, and anything that contradicts this starts to seem just like what the enemy wants you to believe. And we've seen this to a really remarkable extent in the United States, where we see things like the QAnon phenomenon, where we've got people who are believing really quite bizarre things about their political opponents, right? The idea that, Democrats are running pedophile rings in the basements of pizza joints and so on, and people are believing this stuff, right? Not everybody, but enough people that I think we need to stop and think about this. And I do think that this really does speak to what happens when you have an unbalanced information diet, and when we have no common sense of what is the truth, right? That we don't all believe that what you see on the nightly news is probably pretty close to fact. And so then when that's challenged, you start to think not that, oh goodness, I need to rethink my views, but rather that this is a sign that the enemy is trying to get me to think otherwise. And this has enormous implications for democratic life. If we look at the United States, what's going to happen next week, there's a greater number of people on both sides of the political spectrum who really do believe that their side losing is a disaster, right? That this is the end of America as they know it. Now, granted, the stakes are high, but I do think that these social media bubbles that we inhabit, and the misinformation that comes into them and doesn't get challenged, or that we don't rethink, really does increase that sense that we can't just have normal democracy where the government changes periodically. And so, as a political scientist who's studied democracy and elections for a couple of decades, I really do think that, what we're seeing in the United States right now, which is driven in large part by technology, is a huge worry.
Well, and so I'm going to jump in with a regulatory comment on what you said, because one of the struggles that we're facing is, so something like misinformation it's not illegal, right? So we used to have a crime of spreading false news, but it was struck down by the Supreme Court of Canada. And so the only thing you end up falling back on is really defamation law, which is where it's the law that you might be able to sue somebody if they've spread a lie about you that essentially impacts your reputation. But this was always seen as kind of this narrow area of the law dealing with communication, where, maybe the press posts an article about a politician and it's untrue, and then the politician sues, or sometimes between two individuals, right? But now we're finding that this area that's been this kind of narrow corner of communications regulation is having wider significance, because it's the legal framework that's the infrastructure for all the different ways that information flows online now. So suddenly this weird corner of communications law matters to national security, because you mentioned the pedophile ring in it. And it reminded me of that, because the law you would look at for something like that is probably defamation law. The wider issue we're dealing with here is national security. Law has been traditionally siloed here. So you've got law, everyone in their corner, and then you've got this other space, which is the companies creating their own policies. And at the moment, I would just say it's just a whole big hot mess. And so we're trying to figure out, how do you create kind of these cohesive regulatory policies, and how do you have these different people talk to each other to make sense of it? And it's not that easy.
Well, this is a Schulich School of Engineering event, so I think we should give the last word before we open it up to questions to an engineer. So I am going to ask Hattie if technology has any potential to get us out of this, and I quote, hot mess.
Well, I think a big portion of that, it wasn't technology's fault in the first place. So there is two things I'm looking at it. One is whether technology can help fix this mess in a general sense, that it's not just technology's mess, right? So it might be some people, like some of the question you're asking is whether we can change the mind of people, right, that they already have decided and they just don't want to hear anything else. They just want to reinforce what they have. So even if there was no social network, those people would only listen to one particular kind of news channel, and they would only listen to people that their friends that they are alike, right? So that's not going to be changed, right? I think the focus that I can think this technology can help is if this social network and these new ways of using technology is going to help for people who are open to decide if the information is given to them. So the problem with now these social networks and internet and all those things is there is like this massive information and data out there, and you cannot really figure out which one is right, which one is wrong, and how much you can rely on each. So I think technology can provide some help on that. It's not going to solve it. It provides some help to give us some extra information about every single thing that we hear or see or watch, in internet or social network. That piece is missing. It's possible, right? As I said, it can be a button. It doesn't need to, you don't need to regulate Facebook to put down and remove a post. Just regulate that for everything. If Facebook want, if a user wants, so Facebook provides whatever it can to support or basically any evidence that it can find related to that post. Top three, opposing top three, pro and top three against, right? Links and videos or whatever. So I would say by large, this can affect the misinformation spread. So of course, there are some people who still don't care. They are not going to click on that. But there are some people who care. They are going to look at that and only repost it if they believe that it is valid enough for them to share. So I think for that, technology can help. Technology is there to crawl the web, to gather quickly a lot of information, summarize that, and then put some confidence and give you some information to go from this black box, we don't know what's happening inside, to some more kind of information about every single thing that we see.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Hattie. I think the three of us could go on at length, but I see that there are many questions building up in the Q&A box. So I will hand it over to Bill now.
Well, let me start by thanking the three of you. It's been a great discussion, and Lisa, I'm glad the majority, despite your best efforts, still is with me on using technology more. First question I'm going to pose to you connects to a few that have been posted. If we think about modern democracies, Canada, the United States, this is not the first time we've seen new technology, right? When modern democracies first started, there was no radio, there was no TV. So the first part of the question is, was there the same concerns when we saw the advent of radio, TVs in every home? And then the second question is, and you might relate it to back then to now as well, is how much influence are we talking about in terms of the impact of social media, the impact of very targeted campaigning to individuals based on their digital footprint? Realistically, is that a 5% swing in the vote, or could that even be a greater swing in the vote? So over to the panel. Lisa, why don't we start with you?
Okay. So I'm going to start with the first question, and I think that's a really perceptive question to ask historically, because absolutely, election campaigns have changed based on the technology that's available. When radio came along, all of a sudden it was possible to communicate with larger groups of people directly instead of having to do whistle-stop tours from the back of a train. When television came along, it started to matter what candidates looked like. There was the famous presidential debate between where Nixon had sort of 5 o'clock shadow and looked shifty, and a lot of it was one of the first debates, and the sense was that he lost during that debate because of the medium. And so, I think many humans are averse to change, and we tend to see changes to the way things that are done as being problematic. So there was a backlash to radio and to television, but I do think that this is a little bit different than what we've seen with other changes, just because of the magnitude of the change and some of the implications that everybody could see the difference when it came to television. We were experiencing a common phenomenon. And I think one of the things that really worries observers about the switch to social media is that we're no longer having the same election. We're experiencing our own private elections on our small screens. And so I think it's that lack of transparency about what's going on that really does create anxiety. And then when you couple it with the fear of foreign intervention, it really takes things up a few notches. In terms of how much influence this has in terms of voting, that's a really tricky one. And there are quantitatively inclined political scientists who try to measure these things, and it's really tough to do because it's such a complex set of phenomena. We can certainly observe in a qualitative way that it's changed the way that we talk to each other, the way that parties position themselves and communicate. In terms of actual shift in votes, much harder to measure.
Either of our other two, Emily, you want to?
Yeah, I'll just say one narrow comment that kind of the history of the regulation of the communications media in this space was kind of like this difference between push and pull media. So, for example, if you looked at newspapers, it was always lighter regulation because it was seen as pull, that you had to go and search out the newspaper and try to find content. But that push media would be something like broadcasting, which it was pushed into your home. You didn't have as much control over it. And that's why we historically have seen much stronger regulations of broadcasting media, and radio is somewhere in between. We've always tried to shove the internet into some sort of comparative context with those media, and it's never quite worked for regulatory purposes. So it's kind of ended up being a bit of sort of a free market, lack of regulation of the internet up until recently. But I think, as we noted at the beginning, that momentum is changing, but where it's going to land, whether it's going to be more like broadcasting or something like the newspapers, we're not sure at the moment.
Thank you. Hattie, this is one that you might want to start with, and it has to do with Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. Who are the moderators? How much of it is an algorithm? How much of it is a person? Can we trust those moderators? And then maybe for some of our for the other two panelists to jump in as well, is what about the conversation that you talked about a little bit in the earlier parts of the panel, that some people feel that these moderators have an agenda and it's more on the political left, and people that are posting more conservative opinions are being moderated more than people on the left. So Hattie, why don't you start with who are the moderators? How much of it is done via an algorithm versus a person?
Well, a lot of this is unknown because these are inside companies and you don't really know, and they don't publish this to see exactly what is going on inside their company. But it's a mix, of course. And I would say a large portion of that is algorithms, and the moderators are following the policy of the company. So what is matter is what is the agenda and the policy of the company in a large, right? So the algorithms, what they do is we pretty much know what they do, right? The piece that we don't know is what follows the policy and agenda of the company, right? Ranking the posts to see which one should show up based on the engagement, which is, so this is pretty much, we are sure that this is the agenda of every single social network, right? So they get the money out of our clicks. So that is in the algorithm, so that we know. And we know that this might have, as I said, might have some consequences. Some videos, some titles are more clickbaits, right? So they are designed in a way that the algorithm is going to put them higher. And then when it started to get more clicks, more people are going to see, oh, this is more clicked, and they come up and up. But what is the agenda of Facebook internally in terms of what should be kind of manually out of whatever the algorithm says, get down and then push them higher, like add some weight to these to come high? I don't know about those. Those are the political decisions of a company. If they have, I have no idea. So maybe Emily knows more.
I don't think anyone quite knows the answer to that. And I think that it comes down to that hard issue that we've all been trying to toss around today, which is what is truth? I know that the last election, the same accusations were being made, for example, against Facebook in particular. And at least different news stories about, anonymous sources talked about how, in fact, they were almost erring on the other side for fear of being accused of being not neutral in the way they were taking down content. But I don't actually know what the answer is here. All that we know is that essentially what we're dealing with is what we see as being accurate or not, and a lot of that ends up being a deeply political perspective. I think that what they have found is that I think some of the stats I've seen is that some of the more extreme alt-right, I guess you could call it, content has been what has been taken down, but that might also just be the nature of the number of people clicking on that particular content more than really it being a political agenda on the part of these platforms.
Lisa, before you jump in and add your opinion to that question, maybe you could also frame it in terms of potential biases in media that we're more familiar with, such as on television and in print and newspapers.
Right.
And how much is it different?
And, there are a whole bunch of really interesting questions here, right? And I mean, the first is that the bygone era that I think a lot of us I'm certainly nostalgic for is an era where there was a reasonable degree of consensus that mainstream news organizations were putting out what most people could see to be the truth. Now, certainly lots of push and pull about biases that are built in, and I think absolutely there are things to this, but there is this notion of sort of trained journalism, a set of rules about not reporting something unless you've got verification of the information and so on. There was a notion of truth that we could go back to, and I think one of the things where Canada is really quite fortunate relative to the United States is that we've maintained that to a greater degree. In the US, I think the proliferation of news networks that do have a political spin and are increasingly politically engaged is one of the things that's eroding that sense of there being an objective truth that we can refer back to. But absolutely, attempts to regulate election advertising, for example, in Canada in the television era could be subject to accusations of bias because it might mean that the party that's able to raise the most money can't spend all of its money because there's limits on how much ad time that they can buy, right? And so that could affect, it would typically be a conservative party because they tend to have more access to money, right? So neutrality is a really elusive thing in this space. And of course, it's the value that we most want to set the playing field for elections to take place on. So the social media era has just made it that much more complicated, in part because of the difficulty of regulating that Emily has talked about. But also, I think in some ways because political actors on different sides of the spectrum are approaching it differently. And it's very difficult not to look at this in terms of some of the things that are going on in the US, and the two parties are approaching the digital space differently, and they are you know, I'll make my partisan comment here that, you know, the Republican Party appears to be less concerned with truth in advertising, and there's certainly, because of the people, the demographic of people who they're targeting, they've been able to use mechanisms like Facebook to greater effect, right? To get out messages that motivate people, and there's a degree of lack of reality there. So you're muted, Bill.
Lisa, one of the questions in the chat I have to ask you directly because it speaks to voting online in your effective comments earlier that the voting institutions in Canada don't necessarily have the funding or the capacity to have secure systems for something that happens every 4 years. And the question reads, why not design a system that allows you to vote from your online banking account? Since you made reference that it's so secure and they have to do it every day.
Well, you know, here's the thing. When we think about running elections, one of the values that has been really important in most democracies, and certainly in Canada, is the notion of an independent government agency at arm's length from the government that is able to run elections, that it's this neutral body that's responsible for making sure that the election is run well. And in Canada, we've done this well. We trust our electoral institutions to a remarkable extent, and that helps keep democracy safe. To hand it over to companies that have an interest in the outcome of the election. So banks, it matters to banks who's going to win the election because they're regulated by government. So that would really be, to my mind, the beginning of the end of Canadian trust in Canadian democracy.
Let me sneak one more question in for the panel along the same lines. There's a number of questions that speak to the debate between having the ability to vote at home on your computer or on your smartphone. You know, one question is paper ballots can get lost or a box machine could get destroyed. There's a reference to an election in Belarus and how that was manipulated. And then on the other side, there's a question of undue influence. For example, if you're voting at home, there could be more influence on the person voting than if you're in a polling booth by yourself. And maybe just around the panel, starting maybe with Emily, last views on voting at home with your smartphone or on your computer.
I think that that's a valid concern. And that the idea that we don't actually know who is voting. But to my mind, then I look to someone like Hattie, who can maybe innovate some solution about ways that we can authenticate who people are to potentially overcome that.
Yeah, I think, again, technology-wise, we can find ways around all of these issues. It's more about whether we want that transition or not. That is my perspective.
Lisa, you get the last word of the panel.
Okay. Well, you know, it's absolutely possible to steal a ballot box, put it in the back of your car and run for the hills. That voting fraud can take place with paper ballots, but it's, I would argue, a lot easier to evade detection if you're trying to influence the outcome of an election through electronic means, as opposed to having to physically steal that ballot box and take it away.
Thank you to all three of our panelists. Time has flown by and it is time for us to wrap up. I think we should redo this panel in 10 years, as Hattie has said, and see if we're at 100% and see if we're all where our thoughts are. Of course, I'd like to thank everybody who's joined us today for this really important conversation. This really was a compelling conversation. Thank you again for joining us today, and I hope everybody has a wonderful day and look forward to watching the election results in the US next week live on social media. Take care.